All right, welcome everybody. Hello, my name is Leandra Neffin. I am the Social Impact Advisor with Red House Series and a producer with House on Fire Productions. So today, joining us on our virtual couch is the Exeter Chiefs For Change campaign. This is a campaign that actually I've been working with behind the scenes to speak out against and raise awareness here in the UK on the imagery and branding with the Exeter Chiefs Rugby Club. So before I get started with that, I want to just give a bit of context in terms of, what's been happening more recently. I'm sure a lot of people who may be watching this are aware of the Washington football team, who has now gotten rid of their name, the Redskins, which was a very denigrating, racist name for Native peoples. And over here, that has extended in the UK and throughout Europe. So we've got an Exeter Chiefs Rugby Club who is a part of the Premiership Rugby and has basically taken on Native American imagery. And it's been really problematic. And I think a lot of people don't take into consideration that Native culture permeates contemporary life. And so for me as a Native woman living here in the UK, this has been really difficult and damaging to see us being represented as caricatures. So I actually started a group of UK natives who live here in the UK. And a woman by the name of Alex Burhouse had reached out to me, and she was behind a group of people who were campaigning and who brought about a petition to get rid of the racist Native imagery and branding that was being used at the Exeter Chiefs Rugby Club. Now, what this looked like, just to kind of give people an idea, is people, fans would pile into the stadium on game day wearing fake headdress, doing the tomahawk chop chant. They would have bars and gift shops with the names of Wigwam and Powwow and Trading Post. So these were all very damaging narratives that were being spun and woven here in the United Kingdom. So a few of us from our group of UK natives that are living here decided to join, and we've been working to speak out and kind of challenge and push back against this dialogue that's being put forward. So what I'd like to do is just kind of bring the team on and get them to introduce themselves. This is really quite a unique situation because we represent such a small minority here in the UK. So we've relied on these kind of invaluable allies and supports. And these are actually fans who have brought forth this petition to change the imagery and branding. So what I'd like to do is have everybody do a short introduction of who you are, who's behind the scenes here, just to get the audience an understanding of who you are. And I want to thank all of the audience for joining us today as well. So please, can I get somebody to start off our introductions, please?
Hi, I'll go first.
Yeah, go
I thought I'd jump in there instead of the awkward. So I thought I'd just jump
Yeah,
in.
thanks, Mary.
My name's Olatokunbo Mary Williams. I am a long-time rugby supporter, used to play back in the day. And I joined the campaign because rugby is a sport that I love, and I think that there isn't any room for racism in the world that we currently live in. So I joined because dealing with the nuance of racism is a big thing. So that's very, very short, in a nutshell, introduction of why I joined and my name.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Anybody want to jump in next?
Yeah, I will then. So hi, I'm Elizabeth Holloway. I am actually an Exeter Chiefs fan. I was born in Devon, where Exeter is in the southwest of England. Big sports fan, have been my whole life. All my family support Exeter City, the football team, and Exeter Chiefs, the rugby team. And I felt uncomfortable with the branding for a few years, really, as you started to see the backlash in the US. Then I started to think that's no different for us. So that's how I got involved.
Okay, great. Who's next?
I'll just go off the back of what Elizabeth said. Same, born and raised in Devon. Family, most of my family support Exeter Chiefs. A lot of my friends support them as well. I support them and noticed that, yeah, as a fan, this type of behaviour that fans are engaging in, just it's not appropriate. It starts off as a small feeling of this is wrong, and then you go and do a little bit of digging and a little bit of research, find out the kind of scale and extent of it, and then I connected with the others in the team on social media, and we decided that we were kind of going to bring all these resources to the attention of the club rather than rely on them to go out and find them themselves, because that probably wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So that's how I got involved.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Who's next? Who's going to jump in and be brave?
Hi, I'm Ben Jenkins. I'm also an Exeter Chiefs supporter, season ticket holder as well, and have been for sort of a number of years. And as kind of Laura and Elizabeth sort of both alluded to, obviously this is something from my perspective that sort of we've understood over the last few years, really. And we've become more aware as to how problematic it is. And also kind of aware as well as to really almost as well what a missed opportunity Exeter had in terms of actually changing its branding to be a positive branding for our own local identity, local culture. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, and we'll get into that actually a bit more as we get in, to kind of talk about the history and what it is exactly that Exeter Chiefs for Change campaign is actually looking for in terms of changing the branding and imagery. Okay, who's going to jump in next?
I will. I'm Tony Perry. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, living in England. I've been here in the UK for about 20 years now, all said and done. And I've gotten to meet with Leandra and learned about the campaign, and the more I learned about what the Chiefs were doing and their insistence on keeping something that they know are offensive, we went way past the point of I don't know, or I don't know any better. So I just joined in to try to share a native perspective, trying to give some kind of point of view for the people that they claim to know about but know nothing about.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony's been an absolute warrior on Twitter, beast, tackling a lot of
My
abuse
nature.
there. Yeah, incredible, invaluable member, behind the Twitter kind of feed and everything. Who have we got left? Anybody else want to jump in?
I think that just leaves me, does it? Hi, my name's Steph Land. Hi there. I have quite a unique lens. As you can tell from my accent, I'm Scottish, but I have Alaska Native heritage, so from the Inupiaq Nation. And I got involved with the campaign because I'm part of Native UK group with Leandra, and she asked me to come on board, and it's been such a privilege working with you guys. And I'm in the last year I've been working on trying to be more vocal in my views on working on anti-racism, and particularly obviously being of part Native Alaskan heritage. I was really thinking this is a really important campaign, and I'm reconnecting with my heritage. I'm trying to learn more about it, and I'm acutely aware that it's not just about going, I'm Native, how cool is that? It's actually doing the work as well of being involved in these campaigns. And so I was really quite really committed to this campaign. And so that's my story. And I'm a massive rugby fan. So I go to Murrayfield. I'm a long-suffering Scotland fan at Murrayfield. I have a season ticket there. So I have that interest with this campaign as well, being a rugby fan. So, yeah.
Oh, great. Another invaluable. Stephanie's really great on Twitter. She kind of just drops bombs. She's like a silent,
I won the internet that night, I think.
Oh my God. I think there's, I'm sure we'll come to, but there's one, it's been a lot of social media, but there was one tweet that Stephanie did that I actually kind of want printed and put on a t-shirt, because as the campaign has been going on, we've been getting more. They want very specific things. Oh, well, do you know any natives who have complained about Exeter about branding like this? Yes. About Exeter's branding? Yes. Fine. If you find me a native who's complained about Exeter branding, who watches rugby, then I'll believe you. And then Stephanie just put out this tweet. She's like, hi. And it was like, wow. Absolutely my favorite moment of this whole campaign. And it was just, I can't remember word for word, but it was like, I'm Stephanie. I'm from the Inupiaq, sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly, Inupiaq Nation, and I'm a season ticket holder at Murrayfield. And it was just like, awkward.
Love that. And we went beyond social media as well, as hard as that has been, you know, in the middle of a pandemic and lockdown. So we've written a piece for the Eye newspaper, a national newspaper with national circulation here in the UK. Been involved with different interviews on television or newspaper online sites as well. So just trying to raise awareness of the campaign, but also just trying to explain as well about why this is important. Particularly from a native point of view, why does this actually matter in the middle of everything else? And just trying to show it's not just about being political or whatever else, because we have nothing else to do, but because it matters. And so, yeah, it's been a good experience, just trying to get as broad of a message out, or to as many people as we can over the past year or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as we'll get into, I mean, when you look at the psychological literature, it's directly linked to, you know, very negative consequences on mental health, particularly for our youth and our communities, you know, especially when you're struggling with your identity anyway. And then you've got these kind of narratives being spun in social spaces, you know, in media spaces. So what I want to kind of get into then, to start off with, just to give the people who are listening some context, can somebody just kind of give me a history, you know, real short history of the club and kind of how it came about? And, you know, because I think a lot of times people don't realize that actually here in the UK and Europe, that this is actually very problematic, and even further afield, you know, when you're looking in, I think Tony did some work. Was it with Iceland? No.
It was in Sweden. There's a hockey club in Sweden.
That's right.
It's actually changing their name now, finally, as of I think this year or next.
Yeah. And so that was great work, you know, in terms of, you know, trying to, you know, reach further afield, even beyond the UK. So can somebody just give our audience just kind of a brief history of, you know, how Exeter Chiefs came about in terms of using native imagery and branding?
I think I said that I would
Ben's our man.
Yeah.
So just to give a kind of bit of a background, probably actually almost rather than start at the beginning, just to give people a bit of an idea as to kind of who Exeter Chiefs are now. They are the season before last European champions. They were the 2 times English Premiership champions. They've been in the final of the Premiership. Premiership final for the last 5 seasons, playing at Twickenham Stadium in front of 80,000 people in the final. So you could probably quite easily say they are one of the top 3 club sides in the world of rugby union, which in itself is one of the world's biggest worldwide sports. So that, in terms of kind of global perspective and kind of where that imagery is actually being shown, it's been shown sort of nationwide throughout Europe, literally throughout the world. So this is quite a growing major sporting team. So, but what's interesting about Exeter Chiefs, and the reason sort of certainly in the past kind of 10 years or so, is they are actually a relatively new professional sporting team. So they only actually got promoted to the Premiership in 2010. So their rise to the top, literally the top of the European club game, has been dramatic. And for many people, it's a fairy tale. They take away the branding, etc. It's a sporting fairy tale of literally going against everything. Sort of basically all the sort of big teams, big established teams, They were the little guys from an area of the country that doesn't normally have a great deal of sporting success, to be honest. We don't have lots of football or soccer teams. We've never had a Premiership soccer team sort of here. So the achievements of the club have been remarkable, and most people will sort of testify to that. So that's kind of, I think it's important to kind of say sort of the recent past, or to kind of say where Exeter are now and why it's only going to be a growing problem for them, because again, so big, basically. In terms of the history, and obviously the kind of big question is, where does the name Chiefs come from? And again, everyone on the panel will testify in terms of one of the questions that we get kind of constantly is, well, are you going to be changing the name? And that type of question. What's wrong with the name, etc. So in terms of, from what I understand in terms of the history of the club and where it has come from, Exeter is literally, well, we're celebrating our 150th anniversary this year. So we were formed in 1871. Now, we weren't formed as the Exeter Chiefs. We were formed as, well, in fact, Exeter Football Club, but Exeter Rugby Club. And there's a bit of question marks in terms of when did we first start actually using the name Chiefs. I think I found some early evidence from 1895 in the newspapers. But between 1895 and the early part of the 20th century, the first team started to be called the Chiefs. And that was quite a common way of referring to the first team for lots of other clubs as well. They would refer to, if they ran multiple teams, they would refer to the first 15 as the Chiefs, or the second 15 as United, or the youth team as Colts, basically. And so lots of other clubs would have the same thing, but it was never let's say a formal nickname. It was very rarely kind of used in the latter part. And mostly, for most of the 20th century, Exeter were known as just Exeter Rugby Club, basically. Where things changed was in the mid-90s. Rugby had previously been an amateur sport, and professionalism was completely banned. The mid-90s, rugby went professional, and they started to develop a league structure. And so you had a lot of teams who then wanted effectively to become almost businesses. They needed to become businesses in order to be able to pay their players. So, and Exeter were no different. So you had a wide range of very traditional rugby clubs who, again, looked to US sporting franchises and saw the nicknames, all the different types of nicknames that were in the US sporting kind of systems, which would help almost identify themselves, put them out in terms of a crowded marketplace. So at that time, Exeter were in the second tier of English rugby, which isn't anywhere equivalent to the second tier of football. They were only getting crowds of probably 1,000-2,000 at the time. A local businessman, Tony Rowe, got involved with the club because they were in quite dire financial situations. And that was in probably the late 90s. And so basically, he had the idea of wanting to professionalize the club because it was being run in a very much an amateur way. He wanted to be able to stand out. He was trying to come up with branding ideas, and from what we've understood sort of in the past, literally probably spitballing loads of different ideas sort of around. And from what we understand, he was having a conversation with one of the old timers in a bar whilst he was trying to come up with an idea as to what to brand the club. And this person said, well, do you know that the team used to be called the first team used to be called the Chiefs? And he didn't know that. And then obviously a light bulb sort of went off, and then Chiefs, obviously then looking at this is the late sort of 90s, looking at how that imagery, how that wording was used in American sports, went to a local designer, basically, and that's pretty much where the branding came from. There was no great thought process in it. It was literally Chiefs, what do we associate, or what does that branding expert associate with that? So that was in the kind of late 90s. And then in terms, just to bring it to a little bit of end, in terms of where things kind of really kicked off, Exeter moved to a new stadium in mid 2005. A lot of new supporters came on board. And they didn't have any history necessarily with the club. So their history with the club is the branding, the Exeter Chiefs for Native American imagery. That's all they know. And so actually, a lot of the kind of fan kind of support, for example, the tomahawk chop, etc., that's only really a 10-year recent thing. And so it's not been the entire course of the branding. It's only, about 10 years ago that, again, people started to use that. And again, the naming of the bars, etc., when we moved to the new stadium. So that's kind of, a little bit of a brief history.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's great. So it gives us kind of, some really great context in terms of how this came about. But, you mentioned something in terms of the reach that this team has, because this team, their games were actually being shown in America, on NBC, I believe it was. I don't know if I can say. But yeah.
There's a television deal with NBC. I'm not sure in terms of last year how prominent it was, but certainly the previous year, it may have even Premiership games may have even actually been shown on network television, but they were certainly shown on there. If you had the NBC cable sports sort of networks, it would be that they are shown. European games are shown as well.
I'm sure there's a Canadian broadcaster as well that's also picked up the Premiership.
And it's also important to note as well that the last year, I think they are an American hedge fund, CVC, has just brought into the Premiership rugby. So basically, I think it was about a £250 million deal. Okay. There's a lot of views in terms of Premiership rugby have, before the pandemic, were making a very big effort to break the American market. In fact, they were actually teams were going over to play regular season fixtures, which again, you have to think with the Premiership Rugby want the Exeter Chiefs playing a game in New York like Saracens or London Irish did just a couple of years ago. So this is obviously with the league organisation, there's a definite idea that the American and North American market is a big area to crack.
Yeah, and we're sort of seeing that any crossover happening, with the NFL teams coming over here to play, NBA's coming over here, and there seems to be this kind of, cross here that wants to happen with the rugby, wanting to break American markets. But I think too, part of the campaign is that it's not necessarily to change the name Chiefs, because there's actual historical context in terms of some of the ancestral tribal kind of roots that are evident in Exeter. And so I wondered if somebody can kind of talk about that, because they're really missing an opportunity here to kind of ground the people of Exeter and even, more broader kind of the South UK, South England, to kind of tap into that educational resource of around their history, around their ancestral heritage, their genealogy. And there's so many more connotations that, within the schools, to kind of elicit pride in who they are, rather than co-opting, native heritage, across an ocean that they have no connection to. So I wondered if somebody could kind of, talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is something we said from the beginning, that the club doesn't necessarily need to change the name from Chiefs, because we know that chief in itself isn't an offensive word. It's the context in which it's being used, which is harmful and offensive. Devon has got a really rich history. It was one of the kind of main Roman cities. So my pronunciation is going to be awful, but Isca Dumnorium,
No.
I think it was pronounced. So the school that I went to was actually called Isca, which was named after the like Roman name for Exeter. It got rebranded, funnily enough, when I was there. So there is kind of like a a celebration and understanding of that history everywhere you go in Exeter. You've got old medieval castle ruins, you've got Roman rules, you've got kind of Tudor buildings, you've got a historical quayside, you've got a beautiful cathedral, and then the geographical kind of landscape of Exeter as well. You've got the river, which was obviously really important for trade. You've got down to the to the coast to Exmouth. I mean, Sandy Park, the name of the Exeter Stadium, kind of has that sort of beachy kind of kind of name to it. Perhaps they could kind of go down that sort of route. You've got the moors nearby, you've got Dartmoor, you've got Exmoor, you've got Holden Forest. Like, geographically it's a really interesting place. There's a lot of wildlife, a lot of nature. Like, if you're looking for those sort of historical chieftains, then you've got the Dumnoni tribe, who you can kind of look to. Sorry, Ben's like waiting to correct my pronunciation there. So yeah, so there's so much opportunity, and like you say, opportunity to kind of reach out and work with schools and create some pride. And what type of mascot would you like to see? What should the bars be called? Like, what type of local food can we sell there? Like, one of the kind of the great things that people love about going to watch an Exeter game is like getting a pint of cider and a pasty. It's not necessarily wearing a headdress and doing the tomahawk chop that people go for. Like, there's other kind of little local things that make it kind of quirky and make it different. And one of the sort of biggest criticisms that we've had of the campaign, but one of our biggest achievements to date, is that when Exeter actually reviewed the branding last year, they did decide to get rid of the Big Chief mascot. So we kind of presented our petition, and we presented an information pack of, these are the elements that we would like you to change, and this is why it's problematic. They decided amongst themselves that their logo was highly respectful, and nobody who had come to the club had ever had a problem with it, and so it was absolutely fine. But they did say that as a mark of respect, they would retire the Big Chief mascot. So now we have families saying, oh, my children are really disappointed because that was something that they enjoyed about going to Sandy Park and watching an Exeter Chiefs game. Well, you can rebrand and you can have a different chief who's got a different like weapon, who does a different dance, who sings a different song. Like, there's so many opportunities to make it into something that families will love, that all ages will be into, to celebrate our local history. It doesn't even have to be a kind of a gimmick. Like, you could just go back to being Exeter Rugby Club if you wanted to, and kind of celebrate the history of the club itself, because it has been such a fairy tale kind of achievement for them to get where they are. So but the brand is so embedded in Exeter. Like, it's quite bizarre that you could be in town on like a match day, and there are people walking around in headdresses, and there are people wearing the logo, and even kind of around Christmas, I remember there was like a bar in town that had some little huts outside, and they were named after like the players that play for Exeter Chiefs. The club is so closely embedded in the community that it should be celebrating the community that it's a part of, rather than stealing a culture that isn't theirs and mocking it, essentially.
And just to
Yeah.
follow on from,
Oh,
sorry,
I was just going to say, go on, Tony.
sorry, I just wanted to follow from Laura's point. The history in that area is so incredibly rich. And the more I learned about it, I was just fascinated. You go back even before the Roman times, there are Paleolithic, Stone Age settlements that you find. So we know about Stonehenge in the UK, but then going around Dartmoor and seeing where there were burial mounds and other stone markers there of peoples that most people know nothing about. And I would venture to suggest that people even in Exeter know very little about those, the chiefs and the kingdoms that ruled there. I was on holiday just this summer, going over actually further into Cornwall, but I stopped over and found a book around Devon and its history and the links to King Arthur. Again, I knew nothing about that, and I would bet that most people there don't either. And so you're really missing a valuable opportunity to celebrate the Indigenous people, so to speak, of Exeter and its own community, and why they're just obsessed with trying to mimic what they consider a Native American identity is still beyond me, but they do.
Yeah, and I want to go into some of that, and how that's impacted, us as natives, seeing that. I know for me, when I see the, mocking of the color, brightly colored blue and pink fake feathers and the drum, it hurts, it's like this kind of, I guess the term is probably like blood memory, of kind of ancestors past who were not even allowed to wear headdress or practice, my ancestors, or even, Tony's or Stephanie's, we weren't allowed to even do this. Yet here are a group of people who get to play Indian in the guise of nostalgia, and get to go home and take the headdress off and don't have to live the life of poverty. They don't have to live with the racism or the stereotypes. They get to play it for a few minutes or for a couple of hours and then take that off and go back to their place of privilege. And so, I mean, Stephanie, you're a massive rugby, fan. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I think I said this in the video that we did together last summer, that it's just appalling. I think it's a very visceral reaction, a bit like what you're saying, kind of blood memory. I think that has a part to play. I cannot go to Sandy Park. Or if Exeter, if Exeter Chiefs come up to Scotland, which I think they have, am I right in saying they?
Yes, and they're coming up to play Glasgow soon, so that's going to be fun.
I can't go because it's offensive. It's so abhorrent. I cannot go, and it's such a first world problem. I realize there's bigger problems in the world that that I can't go to a rugby game. It's okay, big whoop, but it's the bigger picture stuff.
Yeah,
it's the stereotype. And I'm doing a lot of anti-racism work. I'm trying to learn about these theories, and we know that these stereotypes are really harmful. It's dangerous, talking as an Indigenous woman, as a Native woman, we've got to remember that part, that a lot of women dress up in this kind of, the sexy Indian princess and think that it's okay to do. And we know, and Leandra, obviously you do a lot of work at MMIW, that plays into the stereotype, the hyper fetishization of Native women. And for me, I think this has to stop, and so it's really problematic. I can't go to Sandy Park. It's a strong reaction for me, and I'm really quite concerned that this is being beamed out into the world, as we've just talked about, all these big contracts. We're living in a very global society. We're living in a global society. These games are being beamed around the world. It's not a good advert for British, oh dear, it's a very kind of cringe, isn't it? So that's my answer.
And it tarnishes the sport as well. I mean, I played rugby a little bit when I was at university in the US, and I had never played rugby before. I'm from Oklahoma, so we have American football, but not so much rugby, certainly in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. So I learned as I went, and I was proud to be part of that team. And so I left with having kind of a favorable impression. I wasn't any good. I learned as I went, and I was just glad to be a part of it, right? And then I come over here into the UK, and then I come across the Exeter Chiefs, and their just complete disregard for people like me. I mean, when you come down to this is a brand, right? This is a brand. And ultimately, a brand is around defining an organization or a cause around something else, right? And so they are by nature trying to define what Native people look like, or what they should be like. And that hit home to me because I grew, when I was in primary school, I went to a school called the Indians. And, and I, just took it for granted because in Oklahoma, a lot of schools are called the Indians or the Chiefs or whatever else. But the problem I had growing up was I could never relate to that Indian or whatever that was around, you know, with the headdresses. I'm Chickasaw. Our ancestors did not wear headdresses in the way that a lot of Plains peoples did. It's just a different culture. I mean, just one quick point in this, you know, it's like the idea of Native Americans having one kind of culture is like saying all of us in Europe have one kind of culture. I'm British and American. I've lived in Britain for 20 years. Does that make me an expert on Ukrainian history and culture or Polish? No, it does not. I know nothing. I wouldn't even begin to try to describe those cultures, right? And yet here's what we've got now in terms of Native Americans. So we've got this idea that this is what Native peoples should be like or should be doing. And the harm that I think comes from that, again, just looking at my own experience personally, right, is that kind of idea, this is what a native looks like. I couldn't connect to that. So I couldn't connect to my own native identity as well either. It's something that I, you know, came to embrace and appreciate actually by being an immigrant, by you know, moving overseas. And then by doing that, you become even more aware of kind of where you're from and your family and heritage, right? So having a team that knows nothing about Native peoples whatsoever, and I'm sorry, as beautiful as Exeter and Devon and is, but it's nothing in terms of Native Americans and our peoples and history. So to claim any kind of expertise and then insisting on, well, we can do this, right? There's no harm to it. You're just being too sensitive. This is what we want to do. I've learned all of these concepts, like Stephanie was saying about around like anti-racism concepts and things, but you know, the idea of privilege, well, I'm seeing it, right? Every single day. It's like, well, I don't mean harm. I'm going to carry on and do it. And to think that that is okay. The other point that I'll just be very quick that I see is in the UK overall, and I think maybe the Chiefs have kind of helped stimulate this conversation, but what I have seen certainly over the past year is that Native Americans are almost a racial release valve for things that you cannot say or do in polite society. In the UK, we do not have a freedom of speech idea that many in the US do, right? So you can actually be arrested for making tweets. In fact, just recently we had football championships, Euro 2020 in 2021. And so there were people that have said just outrageous things on Twitter. And, you know, around 3 Black players who are put in a position that they themselves will never have the skills or capability to ever even think about being on a pitch for in the semifinals, right? And so they decided they could make all these tweets. Well, guess what? Police forces in the UK and actually abroad went and found these people. Rightly so. That's great. But we've got a team now that will every day decide, well, this is what we can do. You cannot wear or have like, I don't know, a gollywog or go in blackface in the streets of the UK. You wouldn't make it across the other side of the street if you tried. But even if you did, you'd probably be arrested and have all sorts of problems. But yet you can if you're going as a Native American. Why? That's a question I still have.
I think it's just one of the.
Go on, Mary.
Oh, sorry. It's just one of the biggest things that I've noticed. I mean, you're talking about the Americas. You're talking about land that covers the equivalent of London right the way through to Beijing, and we're all saying that it's this one cartoon image of this one people. Like that's what they all look like, even though that's the landmass that they cover. If you went to Exeter and it was a stereotypical Black chief and people had bananas and it was like making noises, there is no way. There is no way. But yet,
even if they're honoring them.
Oh well, you know, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I absolutely feel like certain celebrities plumping their lips up, putting their hair in cornrows, and wearing layers of fake tan that they can wash up. Absolutely, it's an honor to me as a Black woman. Yeah, but it's the same narrative. It's the same appropriation. As quite rightly as you said, Tony, it's just like, oh well, we're allowed to do it to them because it's not really racist, and it's also a part of this, like in in the UK, it's very, and the racism is very black and white. And I mean that quite literally. And there's no idea of this nuance. So you have rugby, which is the second biggest watched sport in the whole of the UK, going rugby against racism. And you're like, are you though? Are you? Like,
no, not so much.
And then the Premiership's going, oh, but we can't do anything about this club's branding, but we're against racism. Are you the, like, it beggars belief. And it's that there's no nuance to understanding racism in the UK. And I mean, there's going to be people from North America, obviously, in this conversation, but there are people, it's almost like the racism is more mature in the US, and it knows what it is. It gets what it is. And it doesn't, but here it's a nuance. It's still like me growing up in the 80s and 90s in the UK, giving away my age. I would have things, I had a very good education. I was very blessed in that I come from an African background. So, you know, I've been lucky to grow up knowing that Black is normal. And then I came to the UK, and when I came to the UK, I found out I was Black. I was in a very, you know, good school, and I had, oh, you look like you spread chocolate pudding on your face, ha 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 ha. And I'd look at the teacher like, and she'd be like, oh, it's just fine. And that's the kind of racism they have here, you know? So to get them to understand the concept that race isn't just, yes, there's racism against Black people. Yes, there's racism to Asian people, because they do get that here a little bit, but that's not it. Like, you cannot treat all cultures the same. And just because Scottish people don't really mind that much, if you wear their kilt, it's not the same, because it's not the same culture. Even if I am talking in a broader sense, but even in, and I'll finish on this point, even in Christianity is a very visual religion. You have crosses, you have pictures of Jesus everywhere, you have pictures of Mary everywhere. In Islam, you cannot do that. Like, in France, they did a picture of Muhammad on the front of the newspaper, and it went wild, you know?
That didn't end well.
So I don't understand how the UK is getting confused about this, because they get nuance in racism, but I don't understand how this is not understood.
This is why it's a problem beyond rugby, beyond Exeter. And this is one of the key points of this that I think we need to get people to understand. This is not up to the club to decide. It's not up to the fans to decide. This is bad for rugby, it's bad for Devon, it's bad for the UK, and it's bad for society. I think that's one of the things we really struggle with. There seems to be a lot of fans and even, you know, non-fans who are just like, well, it's up to the club to decide. Like, that's not how it works, you know. And actually, all of us, as those of us who are Devonians, those of us who are Exeter fans, those of us who are rugby fans, should all be saying, no, because you're bringing my group down as well by sticking to this. And actually, this is not a representation of Devonian people. This is not a representation of rugby. This isn't a representation of UK society, or rather it shouldn't be, you know. So I think that is something that seems to get lost again, because weirdly there's this perception that, as you said, racism can only be against Black and Asian people, and that it can only be attached to hate. You know, there doesn't seem to be this understanding that discrimination is racism, and it's one of the most frequent arguments we have on socials, as Laura, who does all of our Twitter, will testify, is people saying, but it's not racist, or thinking that racism is a be all and end all. Like, if you either somebody is racist in everything they do, or they're not. So their defense to, well, no, Exeter Chiefs fans and Exeter Chiefs as a club can't be racist. This can't be racist because they have Black players, or because I have Black friends, you know, that classic argument, and not understanding that you can be non-racist in some things you do, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be racist in some other things you do.
You know, I think the underlying part of this is that I think that most people have no idea that there are still Native Americans around.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That's the difference here. I don't think it's as much around, you know, that we are a different ethnicity or not. We don't exist. You know, we are people that died out 200 years ago when the world, or the Western world, was civilized, so to speak. And you know, it's just another extension of of colonialism, frankly, because of course the United States and Canada took hold largely as British colonies, and of course the Americans and Canadians took hold in their own way and put their own spin on it, and their own damage to it. But most people here do not recognize that there are still actually native nations or peoples, and you know, us as Native Americans, there aren't very many of us here in the UK, and I think that's part of it, but it really comes down to, personally, I think what they are doing is hate. I would say that very strongly.
I think it is now, definitely is now that they know.
As of last summer, when all of this started coming up and there are conversations like, well, what's going on, or am I racist or not? Okay, that's fine. But we've gone way past that. And when the Exeter Chiefs actually decide to say, well, we've spoken with people around the world in a public statement that can be found on the web, that says, well, we've spoken with fans and others around the world, and we decided, well, this is actually, quote, in fact, highly respectful. Well, you may have spoken with other people around the world, but who amongst those are actually Native Americans? Because I'm sorry, but even other people of color, they are not Native Americans, just like I'm not Black, right? I'm not. I don't have that history. I don't have that lived experience. I have the lived experience and ancestral experience of being Native American. And so there are differences. But in the UK, we do have very strong laws around hate speech towards race or sexual orientation, and other areas. So it's not up to an individual to go, well, this isn't racist, or this isn't homophobic, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, because I'm actually saying in my mind, this isn't that. Well, you'll still find yourself actually having a conversation with the police. But why doesn't that happen with Native Americans? And if we're and we are actually a more entrenched part of British society than, again, most people realize. Whether you see us as a club through the Exeter Chiefs, you look back into literature, even Shakespeare had quoted or had a character that was based on a Native American. And I think it was Taming of the Shrew, or no, The Tempest, sorry. And you know, even some of my own Chickasaw ancestors had actually fought in the Jacobite Rebellion, and the knock-on effects of the Jacobite Rebellion we see within British politics today, right? So we are there, and it's just not recognized, it's not seen. And so the problem for me is when non-natives are just saying, well, this they're defining what I should be offended at, or what is disrespectful for my culture or other native people's culture. It doesn't wash. You would never do that with other people.
We get that as an argument quite a bit, don't we? Of well, the two sides to it. One saying, but there's, you know, I'm sure that they've got bigger things to worry about, and are they even watching it and seeing it? This idea that if you're doing something offensive in a vacuum, it's no longer offensive. But also you get some people saying, oh, well, actually, we're doing them a favor, kind of thing. You know, we're keeping the image alive. We're like, if it wasn't for us, the kids wouldn't know about it. I mean, I just think that's obviously like you're educating them with complete lies, mistruths, and you're not actually doing anything to support the communities or the causes at all. And this idea that, you know, people say, well, it doesn't matter in the UK. I can see it matters in the US, where there are lots of Indigenous peoples. If anything, I would say it almost means it matters more in the UK because it's the only, you know, or one of the only exposures we're getting to that culture. And it's so wrong. Like I didn't properly understand until I started reading more, you know, a year or so ago about the different nations. Like I'll hold my hands up. I had no idea that there were that many different nations and that many differences between them, you know. So you think
their honor system has not done anything.
It is you mentioned about obviously the fans saying, obviously, yes, we're doing it because we honor them, honor sort of these different groups, etc. When actually we know that that's the fans have made that up themselves, that idea of honoring, and we know that now because we've seen it. Actually, people have said the reason why the club came up with this particular branding. It wasn't to do with honouring. That wasn't in the management's idea when they were coming up in the late 90s about we're going to take this branding to honour Native American communities. It was a commercial project. But yet somehow over the last 20 years, the fans, or a certain proportion of the fans, have kind of morphed that into in terms of, oh, we must be honouring them, when that was never the intention.
I mean, I think the other thing as well is that the other big reason Exeter need to get ahead of this is I was watching a TED talk by Tara Hauska. I may or may not have quickly looked that up. And she said that Native peoples are one of the fastest growing demographic. I think like something like 46% of natives are teenagers and adolescents. So they're the fastest growing. Now, World Rugby has said it wants to globally grow rugby in the world. So who do you think is going to be playing rugby in 10 years' time? It's this giant, fast-growing demographic of people, you know. You've got like the Iroquois roots rugby, Iroquois roots rugby. Sorry?
You got your t-shirt on.
Yes, I do have my. Arcane branded. They, you know, they're growing rugby in Canada, and then you've got Thunder Rugby, they're growing rugby, and the kids that they're bringing up are going to start looking to the country that is really driving forward the growth of rugby, which I think World Rugby is situated in Ireland, but it's going to be the UK a lot of the time, you know. And you got this club.
Yeah,
it's just there's no situation where not changing the branding is, you know, like it's gonna have to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of those things. Like
in terms of those younger players, and particularly younger players from the States and Canada, and we've seen that particularly at Exeter Chiefs over the last couple of years, because again, one of the things that Exeter have done in the last couple of years is they've actually started a professional women's team. Now, in women's rugby, actually the US and Canada are far more stronger in world rugby than in the men's team. So actually, Exeter have actually employed a large number of US and Canadian internationals. Now, we're not sure what their views necessarily sort of are, but again, it's a growing market of the sport. So it is going to become increasingly problematic, and eventually there will be a player, and a very, very good player, who will say, no, I don't want to play for Exeter Chiefs. I don't want to be associated with that branding. One day that will happen if they carry on that route.
Still
I hope so. Okay, so I there's so much more I want to say on this, and I guess
sorry, we talk a lot. We're passionate.
It's okay.
Absolutely.
No, it's great because it offers a lot of content and stuff. But yeah, you know, I mean, and this is kind of the conversations that, you know, happen behind the scenes, you know, in terms of some of the work that we are all doing, and you guys are just great as allies and support systems, you know, for our group of UK natives. You know, I think Tony and Stephanie and I have kind of, you know, really valued the friendship that we've started to develop even in this campaign as we work together to dismantle these really damaging narratives. So what I want to do now is just open it up to questions for our listeners. Are there any questions that anybody would like to kind of send through and ask our panel here today that has joined us? Let me just look in the chat and see if we've got anything.
It's always so much pressure to think of questions for these things.
All right. Okay. So we'll let them, you know, because they're thinking, and so we'll kind of leave it open.
We could also just give people an overview of like where we're going and where we need support and how people can help as well.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to go ahead and speak on that,
Elizabeth? Can I do that? Yeah. So we did a petition last year, like initially, just in a kind of, you know, first steps. So that's kind of still running, but we had presented it to the club last year. So it's kind of, you know, it's not necessarily needed anymore, but it's a useful way of people adding their name, and that can be found on, somebody help me, which platform? Change, that's it.
Change.org/Exeter Chiefs.
But I think even if you just Google Exeter Chiefs petition, I think it's the first
Just be
one that
careful,
comes
because
up.
there's a couple of others.
There's a couple of counter ones saying, oh, sign here if you think it's actually not remotely racist and fine. But, you know, it's quite obvious which one you're signing. So yeah, that's how, and also because that enables us to stay in touch with people. We will be launching a website very soon. But up until then, the easiest way of keeping track of what we're doing and everything we're sharing is on our socials. So primarily our Twitter and our Instagram, but also Facebook. So we're Exeter Chiefs for Change on Facebook, and on Twitter and Instagram, we're EX Chiefs for the number 4 change. But I think the others will share as well. We basically are trying to just reach as many people as possible. So we're trying to build up as much of a following as possible. So anything you can do to help get our posts further, to get, you know, more people following and engaging with us, helps us to reach more of the parts of, you know, kind of mainstream British psyche, basically, because the bigger numbers we've got, the more impact it's going to make on the sponsors, the media, etc., etc. And that is how we're going to get the club to change. We've obviously tried talking to them directly, tried giving them a petition, tried presenting them with facts. We've tried to speak to them, and they've made their decision. So we now need to make it untenable for them to continue. We need to make it as uncomfortable as possible by keeping the noise up, by showing that this is socially unacceptable, not by just us kind of, you know, early adopters, but with everybody. So speak to friends and family and help us spread the message. Yeah, basically. And then we'll be doing things like contacting the sponsors of the club, of the league. We're contacting the people who run the other clubs in the league, the Premiership clubs. So we had a really interesting development a few weeks ago where one of the fan groups of one of the other clubs, Wasps, they wrote an open letter to their club asking for the club to ban Exeter fans from wearing headdresses when they visit the ground. And their club responded and said they're going to look into it. So this is, you know, really interesting for us to start to get allies outside of Exeter and actually even outside of rugby. So that's the biggest way for people to help, I think. Anything else on that, Laura?
Just on that point, Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to just to follow up one point on that. It's really helpful in terms of particularly people in the US and Canada as well to show your support, because obviously there's so much focus there about local and national teams, but actually the idea of this branding is spreading out, or has spread beyond the US borders. There are people who dress up and pretend to be natives in other countries as kind of a hobby of sorts. So this whole kind of branding and definition goes beyond the borders of the US and Canada. So any help that you can provide there to help us here in terms of just conveying that actually this isn't acceptable, and particularly for native peoples in the US and Canada, that this does not define us and isn't acceptable as native people, as well as others who would be interested in rugby. The more support that we can get would be the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna just there's one question here.
Yes, we can answer
which
that.
I'm gonna so do you think the community cohesion and regional development aspect from the local authority should be challenged, empowering the community to put pressure on the club? Anyone want to?
We reached out last year to both Exeter City Council and Devon County Council, and we've shared, you know, the kind of fact pack and stuff with them and offered to meet. With the City Council, it's a bit of a difficult relationship, I think, because Exeter Chiefs are kind of one of their main, you know, stars in the area, and I think there's a bit of a difficult political relationship there. However, we also spoke to one of the 2 MPs who represent the area, and one of them is incredibly supportive of us and has tweeted quite a bit. Where we're making more of a breakthrough is with some of the kind of half a step removed from the council. So there's an organisation called Exeter Live Better, which is about attracting tourism, residents, business, investment, etc. to the area. And the council sit on that, but we've made contact with some other people who sit on that, and it is being raised, it has been raised at those meetings. Interestingly, the chairman and chief executive of Exeter Chiefs, Tony Rowe, also sits on that committee. So that has been noted, but we think it's more of a behind the scenes pressure from them. You know, again, I think this is where the media coverage that we kind of do seem to keep getting, which is great, you know, the noise on social media all helps to contribute to the council saying you're making things difficult for us now. So I don't think we'd get the council to speak out publicly, but we can obviously just start to, you know, put the pressure on through all of these different routes in.
Yeah, we noticed that they hadn't, we don't think that they've secured a new main sponsor for this season. So they used to be sponsored by, so they've got various kind of local sponsors. Super Eggs is my favorite.
Yeah.
The Exeter Chiefs, as I now call them. So their main sponsor used to be Southwest Comms, who was, I don't know if they were owned or if it was just kind of led by
he was the director.
So Tony Rowe was the kind of CEO of Southwest Comms and of Exeter Chiefs. He's now
and they were a small local company
Comms.
still, weren't they?
Yeah. That's sorry. I'll the other, just to give it a bit of context, all the businesses are very small and very local, so it's different to what they managed to do in the US, where it was like Nike and Pepsi and whatever it was, and FedEx. It's like, so, you know, packaged eggs.
So
and
Southwest Comms had a 25-year relationship with Exeter Chiefs of sponsoring them. They are no longer the main sponsor. So the front of the shirt where Exeter has their main sponsor is currently blank. They released, so they released their kit a couple of weeks ago and it's currently blank. Speculation, obviously, as to whether that's because they haven't been able to secure a new sponsor, and if that may be something to do with the branding. I think Ben spoke earlier about the scale of the success of the club. You know, they've been European champions, they've been Premiership champions twice, they've been in 6 Premiership finals, their players play for England, you know, you've got
and
like
Scotland
and the Lions as well.
Lions as well. So, you know, you've got, like, they are a big deal in the sport, and then you've got much smaller teams securing much bigger sponsors. You know, like Bath have got like Dyson, I don't know if we can say brand names or whatever, but you know, you've got big companies sponsoring much smaller teams and much less successful teams than Exeter. So it is you know, we're wondering if perhaps this is having an effect. Maybe the existing happy
and I think
price.
I think too that we're starting to kind of see the, you know, change happening, you know, because it's particularly with the younger generation, and social media has such a huge impact and pull in terms of educating people. So if people can follow Exeter Chiefs for Change, available on all social media platforms, as Elizabeth has pointed out. I'm gonna have to call it a day on this one, guys. But I just want to thank you all for joining me. As I know, you know, we have a lot of conversations behind the scenes, and we've done a lot of work over the last year or so. And so, you know, for me, it's really about eliciting that support in North America, particularly here in the heart of the colonial empire. It's so important for us to change this branding, change this imagery. You know, there's so many other ties to this thread that need to be developed and understand. But please, everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you again for taking the time to sit and speak to us at Red House Series. For all of those out there, continue to watch this space. We've got other interviews coming up in the future, particularly with our Not Invisible podcast, part 2. So stay tuned for that. And we will have more Instagram Live on Wednesdays coming up. We've got a few really exciting people and guests joining me on our virtual couch. So thank you very much for everybody to everybody for joining us. Weeb the ha. Wangi de weeb the ha.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
You.